friends and members of St. Martin Lutheran Church. This is Pastor Jim with our daily devotion today. It is 11 a.m. on the dot. I try to start these right at 11 and then do a little chit-chat in the beginning before we get to business at hand to allow people time to log on. Fancier productions have countdown clocks and that, and I'm working on that. We're always seeking to improve our streaming services. It's especially now, but also too looking at this. Good morning, Marianne. Looking at this as well as an opportunity to be able to continue to do this regardless of what happens, and we will get to back to a sense where things are normal, but nobody really knows when, and so we want to be careful. Good morning, Veronica. And I invite you, as you're watching, if you're watching this live or later today, to join us for worship this evening at 5 p.m., as well as worship on Sunday. We've really been getting a great reception from the streaming services for worship, and again, that is something that will continue indefinitely, especially Sunday morning services continue streaming as well. Well, kind of my thoughts for today. Our reading for today is Psalm 25. That's our scripture for today, leading up to Pentecost Sunday, this Sunday. And Psalm 25, it's a very interesting psalm. It could be called almost the teacher's psalm. It has its distinctiveness is in the fact that it's this idea of teaching and teachers runs through it. First of all, Psalm 25 it's what's known as an acrostic, an alphabetic acrostic, meaning each verse represents the subsequent letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, Zion, and so on. It would be like if you were writing a song or a poem in English, and the first line was A, and the second line was B and C. So it's an acrostic, an alphabetic acrostic. And the psalm uses the teacher's rhetorical device, right? Which the question is asked, who are they that fear the Lord? Who are they that fear the Lord? And it's a question that can be answered, but more importantly, it's a question that's meant to be pondered. Who are they? What does it mean, right, to fear the Lord? What does it mean to fear the Lord? And within this Psalm 25, it expresses an eagerness for instruction. Make me to know, teach me, lead me in your truth. And the psalmist, David, it's assumed to be David, it's a psalm of David, so it was either written by David or dedicated to him, but we'll just say David. David writes of the Lord as a teacher instructing sinners, leading and teaching the humble, and teaching those who fear the Lord how they ought to live. And then this psalm, in summary, it sort of covers the whole scope of prayer life. David prays for immediate help from his troubles, but he also prays for instruction about the ways of the Lord and that the path that life ought to take him be made known. And so let's get into it. Psalm 25. Psalm 25 of David. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous. Make me to know your paths, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love, for they have been from of old. Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions. According to your steadfast love, remember me, for the sake of your goodness, O Lord. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore he instructs sinners in the way. He leads the humble in what is right, and teaches the humble his way. All the paths of the Lord are steadfast love and faithfulness for those who keep his covenant and his testimonies. For your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my guilt, for it is great. Who is the man who fears the Lord? Him will he instruct in the way that he should choose. His soul shall abide in well-being, and his offspring shall inherit the land. The friendship of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he makes known to them his covenant. My eyes are ever toward the Lord. He will pluck my feet out of the net. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Bring me out of my distress. Consider my affliction and my trouble, and forgive all my sins. Consider how many are my foes, and with what violent hatred they hate me. O guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Redeem Israel, O God, out of all his troubles. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. Well, as you can see in reading the psalm or listening to the psalm, that it has this thread of teaching. And it begins in the first two verses with an affirmation of trust. What follows after verse 2 are a series of requests for protection and security, that there would be no shame, that there would be triumph over enemies. And as I mentioned earlier, really the distinctive stamp of Psalm 25 is in the requests for and reflections on instruction. Teach me, make me to know, lead me in your truth in verses 4 to 5. Teach, know, lead. And then the requests continue with asking the Lord to remember past demonstrations of love. Lord, remember your mercy and your love, and don't remember the sins of my youth. Who of us don't pray that prayer in some format? Lord, please don't remember the sins of my youth. And maybe in our youth that even maybe means yesterday. And what's interesting is in this psalm, Psalm 25, this psalm uses the three really most important biblical words for sin, three different words that get used synonymously for sin. And the first one is chata, which is translated sin or sinners. And we find this chata, sin, in verses 7, 8, and 18. And with chata, the sense is to miss the target. To miss the target. So that's the first word that's translated as sin or connected to sin is chata. The second is pesha, which is translated transgressions, which means to rebel like a rebellious teenager. Or the example that's get used in other psalms is a treaty partner who breaks the covenant. So you have two parties that come together and they make an agreement or a covenant, and one side breaks that covenant. So that's pesha, transgressions, rebellion. And the third is avon, which is translated as guilt or depravity. And it has this sense of being twisted out of shape or bent over and bowed down. And so here in Psalm 25, we have these three dramatic pictures of what life is like without God. What a life that is not right with God looks like. It's not headed in the right direction. It's off target. It's a life of rebelling. It's a life that is twisted and distorted out of shape. And it sounds dramatic, but as you and I know, sin is dramatic. It is deadly. It is important. Chata, pesha, and avon, three different words that get used sort of synonymously to describe sin. And then as we continue in verses 8 to 10, there's this offering by David on theological education. It's kind of an instruction on education. And here what's interesting, because when we think of theology, it's literally theology is the study of God. And when we think of theology, we think of learning about God. But here, when you read carefully, God is not the object of the educational efforts, but rather the subject. God is not that which is being taught, but the teacher. And those being instructed are identified as chata, sinners. And this instruction involves not just the head, but the feet. Not only talking, but walking in the way of the paths of the Lord. So it is the Lord who instructs the sinners. The Lord is the subject, not the object in this instance. And then after speaking about the Lord teaching sinners, the psalmist expresses really the central request of this psalm, and it occurs in the very center of the psalm, and it's this: pardon my guilt, my avon, for it is great. Pardon my sins. That's the central request at the center of the psalm, and that makes sense. And then from verse 12 and on, the focus moves from the teacher to the student being instructed. And it's assumed that these students fear the Lord, because we know that the beginning of wisdom is fear. And the instruction also has a very specific aim, and that's directing students in the way. And doesn't it make so much sense that early Christian community picked up that thought of we're followers of the way? Later they became Christians. Christians started as it had a negative connotations. People were, those Christians, and they sort of said, okay, well, we're going to own that. We're going to own that negative term, and we're going to call ourselves Christians. But as you know, the earliest Christians consider themselves followers of the way, that we follow something, and it's the way of the Lord. And then the remainder of the psalm, verses 16 and following, it's dominated by these specific requests. Reminiscent of a traditional lament psalm, that in David, that lonely and afflicted, that he's anguished, that he's distressed, that he has many enemies. And then, as many psalms do, it closes with a simple affirmation of trust. It's a sort of confession: may integrity and uprightness protect me, because my hope is in you, O Lord. And it's important to know, too, this is that direct address. My hope is in you, O Lord. In you I put my trust. So Psalm 25, this great teacher's psalm, if you will, an acrostic, which represents the subsequent Hebrew letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Prayers that, Lord, teach me, guide me, lead me in your way. And this understanding that this teaching, it's not just going to sit in our brain, but it's going to be active in our feet, in our lives, and in our heart. And then this serious reflection on sin. 3 different words used to describe sin: chata, sin and sinners; pesha, transgressions; and avon, guilt, depravity, distortion, bent out of shape. And you and I pray that we would be instructed and that we would follow the Lord's way as we continue on our way. So our song for this morning, it made sense. Lord, take my hand and lead me. It's this a great song of a prayer, Lord. And part of being led is submitting, right? We submit to you, Heavenly Father. We submit to you our hearts and our minds and our wills. And once we do that, that's as David wrote in Psalm 51, that's what a contrite heart is. It's a heart that is that allows ourselves to be led by the Lord in his way. But before I do that, I've had a number of comments from people who think I'm being too hard on the puppets during worship. They sense a little bit of aggression in my actions towards the puppets. So I brought one, and I just want to say to you, puppet, I'm sorry for being so angry at you. And this puppet doesn't speak. He just nods. And so he accepts my apology. But no, I'm sick of preaching to puppets. I want to preach to living, breathing people once again. So I'll try to curb my aggression towards the puppets in the future. But that almost sounded like a non-apology, didn't it? That sounded like one of those, well, I sort of am sorry, but I probably will continue doing it. I don't know. I'll try not to. So Lord, take my hand and lead me. Lord, take my hand and lead me upon life's way. Direct, protect, and feed me from day to day. Without your grace and favor, I go astray. So take my hand, O Savior, and lead the way. Lord, when the tempest rages, I need not fear, for you, the rock of ages, are always near. Close by your side abiding, I fear no foe. For when your hand is guiding, in peace I go. Lord, when the shadows lengthen and night has come, I know that you will strengthen my steps toward home. Then nothing can impede me, oh blessed friend. So take my hand and lead me unto the end. Lord, take my hand and lead me. I'll leave you with that sentiment this morning. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Receive the Lord's blessing. Be a blessing to others. Thank you so much for your time, and may God bless your day.